Oh. All right, let's take a look at some of our squash. Now, it looks like these squash might be a little bit sparse looking, but I actually trimmed them up a little bit. I wanted to try to cut back on some of the lower limbs on there, especially the ones that were touching the soil. I couldn't get rid of all of them because then I would have too little to do photosynthesis, but you can see that we've had a pretty decent harvest so far on our squash. These are the first squash that just started coming out, and you can see over in there I got another gray squash that I got to pick. Gray squash is a type of zucchini. It's very prolific. I like to have a mix of different squash in here because I like to do a little bit of research, but I wanted to show you in this example damage from something known as the squash vine borer. Now you can immediately tell that something's going on with your plant because it looks like it's drooping from not having enough water. And in fact, it isn't getting enough water because what happens is the squash vine borer comes in here and it bores into the stem, and then it starts eating the stem from the inside. Now, I treated this particular plant last week. I injected it with spinosad. Spinosad is a byproduct of a bacteria that is toxic to chewing insects, and it's particularly good against caterpillars. But this plant, while it will recover a little bit and produce some fruit, is never going to fully recover because the internal damage was so bad. And this happened in a period of about 2 days. It was doing fine. The caterpillars grow extremely fast. And once they get in there, so I'm going to spray the stems and some of the leaves with spinosad. It'll keep the caterpillars off the leaves because you can see we got a little bit going on here. But it will also help to fight the caterpillars, which are laid as eggs on the outside. And then they bore their way in once they are young caterpillars. The insect that brings them is actually a moth, but it looks almost like a hornet with a red abdomen on it. So if you see those, then you definitely want to whack them and get rid of them. You can tell by looking at them, they almost look like a furry ant flying, but they look more like a wasp than they do a moth. Now over here we actually have a type of winter squash. Now these vines will grow out to 25 feet if I let them, but I'm going to pinch them off at about 15 feet so that they can throw out so they can develop some fruit and not spend all of their energy just on increasing the size of the plant. But this is a variety that I plant called the South Anna butternut. Now the reason I plant these is because winter squash take a very long time to develop, and very few of them will make it all the way without being hammered by the different diseases and insects that are abundant in Zone 8B South. The South Anna butternut, though, is a stable cross between a pumpkin called the Seminole pumpkin and the butternut squash. Now, butternut squash is my favorite type of squash to eat, and this plant, the South Anna butternut, produces plants that taste and look like a butternut, although they're sweeter than a traditional butternut because they have the genetics of the pumpkin in there. And I think they're just absolutely delicious. I think they're sweet enough to do pies if you do pies out of them. And the other great thing about these is that they don't tend to suffer that much from squash vine borers. Now, it's not for lack of trying. If you look down in here, you can see that they're trying to get in there. They're just chewing away at that. But it's a harder stem, and it's much harder for them to get in there. So we're going to hit these on the other side. There's some chewing insects getting in there. A little bit of disease on the end, but you can't expect it down here. There is no plant in 8B South that is not going to be hammered by disease at some point or going to get disease. It's just, we're just in the perfect zone for diseases. So I can't wait for these. I'll get probably 4 or 5 butternut from each plant. I've got about 6 plants in here. And I've got one in there that I picked in August last year that's still sitting on my counter in there. And they're just delicious.